We got a product the fellas gotta have.
Got to figure putting out close to 2,000 crates a week, and that's just for starters.
Boats unload liquor, sail down from Canada, up from the Caribbean, across the Atlantic.
I supply the product, you and your people work your magic.
Boardwalk Empire originated when HBO had given me the book entitled Boardwalk Empire, which is essentially the history of Atlantic City, New Jersey. Within that book, there was a chapter on the Prohibition years, which was 1920 to 1933. Atlantic City was a place right on the Atlantic Ocean, which is where all the alcohol came in through, and it was run by a corrupt politician named Nucky Johnson, who I later fictionalized as Nucky Thompson. And as soon as I read the book, I realized this guy would be an incredible protagonist for a series. So the idea then would be, okay, well, what are the conflicts, who's in and around Nucky's world, and how does this translate into a long-running series? So I started with that character and then sort of thought about the world around him. Because Prohibition started in 1920, there were other historical events happening at the same time. World War I had just ended, and accordingly you had a lot of young men coming back from the horrific fighting overseas to back to America, where now alcohol was suddenly illegal. It occurred to me that you had guys who were off fighting a war, engaging in battle, in many instances killing people, who were very comfortable with the idea of violence, and now suddenly that alcohol is illegal. Guys like that would be very useful for a person who is trafficking in this illegal substance. So I came up with the concept of creating a character named Jimmy Darmody, who is a returning veteran, who is very eager to get into a business where he can make money.
So what's the plan?
What plan?
For the liquor.
Al's got a connection. Capone from Chicago. The fella Remus from Cincinnati.
You know, the idea of being into the alcohol trade, which is, sort of like the drug trade is today, and, making a fortune for riding around on a truck and, guarding alcohol with a gun is very easy to somebody who just came back from the war, where they've been doing stuff like that for free for the last several years. So that was sort of the jumping off point. And of course, because Atlantic City was on the ocean and that's where alcohol came in from, Nucky was surrounded by gangsters who wanted to become his friend very quickly. So in very short order, he was friends with Al Capone, Lucky Luciano, Meyer Lansky, Arnold Rothstein, all of the big gangsters of that day. So the series sort of took off from there. In terms of the actual development of the series, I mean, once we had the characters and the main conflicts, which is essentially Nucky being at the helm of this big criminal organization, it was really a question of beating out the seasons episode by episode. So season 1, for example, spanned about a 9-month period of time from January 1920, when Prohibition was enacted, till the election of later that year of November. So it was about 10 or 11 months. So really is a question of deciding who the main characters are, where the story goes, and then plotting it out episode by episode to arrive at the election where Nucky would sort of best his rivals and then continue on into season 2.
We've been on the road for 18 hours. I need a bed, some chow, and then you and me sit down and we talk about who dies. Huh?
The show running on Boardwalk Empire that I did was really me emulating the style of the way David Chase ran The Sopranos. The writer's room was first and foremost, where it all starts, and it of course all starts with the script. David put together a writer's room of people who were all very comfortable with each other, all very free to talk about anything that came to mind. One of the things that I like to remind my writers initially is that the writer's room sort of needs to feel like a therapist's office in a way. It's got to be a safe place where you are free to explore the darkest sides of human nature, and in so doing, talk about yourself and some of the things you've been through. I mean, you can't tell complicated adult stories without delving into some of the darker aspects of our psyche. So you've got to be in a safe place to sort of talk about your thoughts and feelings, or any stupid, horrible, racist, misogynist things you've thought over in the course of your life are all grist for the mill. And it's got to feel like a place where you can talk about that freely. I mean, again, you're telling stories that are very often about very dark, very broken people, and to do that effectively, you've got to be willing to go and explore the darker natures of your own, personality. Not to say that you are that way, but you've got to be free to talk about it.
I said you're an asshole, you fucking Jew bastard.
And knock that off if I was you.
What?
Jew stuff. You ain't the type I play with.
Right.
First and foremost, you sort of create that safe environment, and it's a lot of storytelling. It's a lot of talking about things that happened in your life, things that happened in your childhood, dreams you've had, etc. One of the exercises we would do in the room is say, like, tell me what's the most embarrassing thing that's ever happened to you? What's the worst thing you ever did to somebody in a relationship, or what's the worst thing you've ever thought? And these are the things where, to somebody who's not really familiar with the process, if you were sort of a fly on the wall listening, you'd say, well, they're not really talking about the show. But that's not really true. All of it is about the show. All of these digressions, a lot of them ultimately end up as parts of episodes or end up informing who characters are and sort of come back and you might talk about something in January and then 5 months later a story you told in January might pop up in episode 5, and it's all part of the process. So it's an interesting way of doing it, and I don't know that every show is run that way, but it's, again, the storytelling and the comfort level that we get in the room really lends itself to the story process as a whole. So generally what would happen is I would come in with an idea for the broad strokes season, and we'd talk about what would happen, what are the story beats that would happen throughout the course of the season, and we break those ideas down into each individual episode. Each individual episode is broken down into an outline, and once we have an outline, that outline would be assigned to a writer who would go off and write the script. I would work with that writer in editing and doing any polishes, and then for the most part, each one of those writers would then be responsible for seeing that script through to completion. So that writer would be on set while it was being filmed, making sure that what's in the script gets onto the screen in the manner in which we intended. That writer would be responsible for going to all the creative meetings in support of that script along with the director. So that writer would be in the room for the wardrobe discussions, the stunt discussions, the makeup discussions, the location scouting, stunts, anything involving how to get that story told in the way we want. That writer would be there with the director to answer any questions all through the shoot. And then that process would continue with each successive episode.
Do you have a suspect?
Waxy Gordon comes to mind.
Naturally.
But it's not Waxy. Because Waxy would have to clear it with you, and you would have said no, because you're in business with me.
That could be what I want you to think.
It could, but I doubt it.
How can you be sure?
Because if you were trying to be obvious, you'd never be that obvious.
This is why I enjoy our conversations.
In a perfect world, you would have a team of writers that stay together throughout the course of the series, and everybody gets along, and everybody, continues to generate new ideas and keep the series fresh. Occasionally, some people don't work out for a variety of reasons. Some people just aren't clicking with the show. They aren't writing the show. Not every writer is right for every show. Not every actor is right for every show, and that goes for me and everybody else. Ideally, you get somebody who understands the show and can mimic it back to you. And you have an ongoing series and you hire a writer, the hope is that they come in and they understand the characters and they understand the tone and they understand how the characters speak, and they can mimic that in their scripts, and that's what you're getting back. Sometimes it just doesn't click. Occasionally also you want to get new blood. You want to get a new perspective on the show. You can get into a show and maybe almost fall into a rut of sorts, 3 or 4 years in. It helps to bring in a new writer who's coming in with a completely different perspective and a different set of eyes that are kind of looking at it. And sometimes it gets you to look at the series in a different way. So it's sort of a little mixture of both. But first and foremost, you want everybody to get along and everybody to feel free to talk about anything they want to talk about, because if you get one monkey wrench in there, it can sort of stifle the entire room.
I'm the only thing keeping you from a lynch mob.
You ready for what happens here? I turn up on the end of a rope.
Hierarchy in the writer's room starts with me as the showrunner, so I'm the showrunner and head writer. I generally have somebody who's either a co-executive producer or an executive producer who's my second in command. And then in general, a few people a little further down the writing food chain at the producer level, and then sometimes lower than that, new writers, story editor, or a staff writer. Those titles, generally indicate at what level you're at in terms of your experience and ability in some cases. The lower level writers, the staff writers, the story editors are really there to contribute but also to learn. They're not held to as high of a standard, for example, as somebody at the producer or supervising producer level. Those people I'm expecting to deliver a script that's pretty much ready to be shot. a story editor, a staff writer, I anticipate having to do work on that script and working with them to get it to where it needs to be.
What do you want?
See a Broadway show, have the chop at Keen's, do a little window shopping, and not be looking over my shoulder every second I'm at it.
And in return?
Maybe you enjoy the beach here.
Not especially.
I want peace, Arnold. That's all.
My mentor is certainly, first and foremost, David Chase. I mean, David taught me everything I know about running a TV series. You know, when I started Boardwalk Empire, it was a very conscious effort to completely mimic the experience of The Sopranos, in that having this really fun, comfortable writer's room, having a very fun, relaxed set where everybody got along. So if you came to visit us on the set of The Sopranos, you would be astounded at how much laughter and how many relatives of people were coming to visit and sitting down, and it was just a really one big happy family, and I was very, very interested in continuing that tradition. Martin Scorsese, who I idolized for my entire life as a filmmaker, ultimately became a mentor as well when I got to work with him. Taxi Driver was really the thing that got me interested in movies in the first place. When I saw that movie when I was 15 years old, it really made me rethink cinema. I had never really considered who made a movie, what is this movie saying, why is this movie different than anything else. I walked out of Taxi Driver and had to rethink everything I knew about film. And that's how I got interested in movies, who made them, who was this Martin Scorsese guy, and then I just started following his career. To flash forward several decades and then realize I'm actually going to be working for him, and to have written a Martin Scorsese film that went on to get Academy Award nominations is just, I still can't believe it. It's sort of, if I would have made that story up, I wouldn't have believed it. And the fact that it actually happened is even more inconceivable.
It's a privilege to do this job, to introduce the world to new music, to shape the culture.
Richie, we're gonna be bankrupt in a month.
Going in a new direction, trying to bring us into the future.
Well, you're over there in the future. I'm here in the present, trying to keep the lights on.
Hey, we're about to turn a corner.
Vinyl was one of the most fun jobs I've ever had. It actually started as a feature script that Mick Jagger had pitched Martin Scorsese in 1996, I believe, called Martin Scorsese and said, hey, let's do a version of Casino in the rock and roll business. So the idea was going to be this big sweeping rock and roll historical epic that took place over 3 decades, tracking one man through his career in the entertainment business. So I came on board to do a rewrite on a pre-existing feature of that. We wrote the feature, everybody seemed to like it, and that was in 2008, and then the world economy collapsed. So the feature version died. My wife actually suggested doing it as a TV series. We reinvented it as a series, took a few years, finally got up and running on HBO, did 10 episodes that I was enormously proud of. I think, unfortunately, we were programmed against The Walking Dead, which probably not a good idea in retrospect. Walking Dead is a juggernaut. And unfortunately, the show failed to launch. We just could not get an audience going up against such a powerhouse. And unfortunately, that just translated into poor ratings. And it was a very expensive show. And even for HBO, who's not particularly ratings conscious, they still need to generate enough interest in something to make the budget makes sense, and unfortunately that just wasn't the case on vinyl, and it's so sad and ultimately really heartbreaking, because I love the show, I love the people I worked with. My writing staff particularly was really just an incredibly functional, fun writer's room, and Bobby Cannavale and everybody on the cast was great, and just really sorry it didn't get to go forward.
I want fresh artists today.
I have something. I think they're pretty good.
Where'd you find them?
I saw the singer on the subway and I liked his look.
That's what I'm talking about.
Do you have any idea how screwed we are?
I'm at a point now where, for the first time in 22 years, I'm not on the staff of a television show, which is very different for me. Since 1999 until 2016, I was going to work every day with a staff of writers working on various shows, and now I find myself, for the first time, wondering what my next project's going to be, and it's actually really freeing. I'm still with HBO. I'm actually writing a movie for them, the Griselda Blanco story. Griselda Blanco was the cocaine godmother of Colombia in the 70s and 80s. If you've heard of the Miami drug wars of the 70s, well, Griselda Blanco was pretty much single-handedly responsible for that. We've also got a few other features. I wrote the Mike Tyson story for Jamie Foxx to play for Paramount. I just did a polish on a rewrite of Scarface for Universal, and I've got a couple of other things in the works as well. So I'm spending more time in the feature world these days, sort of by design, sort of taking a break from TV, but certainly TV is where my first love is, and I'm sure I'll get back to it at some point. I just don't know what it's going to be.
What matters is this man comes in from out of town.
23.
Starts telling Capone what to do about Capone's business and Capone's
26,
house. And
27,
and
28, 29, 30.
I'd say that's pretty goddamn disrespectful.
I think to be successful in TV today, obviously you need talent. You also need a certain tenacity. It's a very difficult business to break into, as is any form of anything in the entertainment business. It's interesting to be a TV writer. There's no one trajectory. If you told me you wanted to be a dentist, for example, I could tell you exactly what you needed to do. You need to get a college degree in science, then you need to go to dental school, you need to get a license, and then you need to work in a dental office, and you're a dentist. If you say, I want to be a TV writer, well, you could go to film school or not. You can go to law school, maybe. You don't have to go to school at all. You need to write a script. You can write spec scripts, or you maybe can work as a writer's assistant and work your way up. So there's no one path, and it makes it even more challenging because there's no one set of things that you need to do to achieve it. I do know that no one has ever rang my doorbell and asked me to read a script I've written. So you've got to write, and you've got to get out there, and you've got to be tenacious. You've got to keep driving. I think at least initially in your career, being tenacious is at least as important as talent. And then once you get a foot in the door, then obviously talent takes over. But initially, to be successful, you've absolutely got to be driven and you got to want it. I always make the analogy that wanting to be on the staff of a TV show is akin to saying I want to play on a professional sports team. If every show is a team, for example, there's that many slots and it's limited, and you've got to be that level of professionalism. There's got to be that level of professionalism for you to get one of those jobs. So think about it, if you wanted to play professional soccer, that's how good you've got to be to get on one of those teams.